from template. I'm using Python 2.7, so keep that in mind when you're going through here. Now, let's actually do a little discovery after we paste this in here. Let's paste our API key. So, Loku API, and it's just that string, so I'm just going to save that for now. I have it saved as api.py, so we'll just keep that in mind for now, but then let's go back into here, and I'm going to look at their API console. Now, this console is just basically showing you what data you can grab from their service. It's very easy and simple, and I mean it's pretty straightforward as to what you're doing. You're doing this quick little search. So in this case, it's a venue search, and you can search by all these different things, or you could say by a region. So let's say Newport Beach, where I am. I can search Newport Beach, type that out. It does a little search for me. It says how many limited, and then it has like objects, and it has all this different stuff. You know, Hair by Courtney obviously does not have a menu, and then Oasis, you know, all these different things are in there, and then of course we could kind of do some other stuff if we wanted to on here, like what their website URL is, and if it has a menu or not. If I do true, it's going to do a new search, and that will most likely bring back food then. Of course, you could change this to whatever category it might fit into, and the way you would know what categories are available, of course, you could just try out something, or you could do a search and see, oh, restaurant is a category even, and I can get rid of has menu, and now it's doing all these like restaurant searches in Newport Beach. Now, of course, depending on what part of the world you're in, it might not have everything. Like, I doubt Rome has anything on there. Rome, Italy, that is. This looks like Rome, Georgia. So let's go back to country and search Rome, Italy. It looks like it has a few things in here too. Yeah, and maybe those are accurate or not. I'll leave that up to you guys to kind of check that out. But in this case, I'm going to be using just Newport Beach as my locality for grabbing this data. Now, something important to note right off the bat is this right here. This is the query. So this is what it's actually looking up. It's sending this to their server, and then that server is giving a response, and then this is the response. So if we copy this URL and paste it up here in a new tab, we see the same exact information. So that's what we see here, right? So that's all this stuff. It's not as pretty, but it's still there. It's definitely there. So now that we see this information, right, we can use it. Since this URL is real and it's actually working, we can open this data inside of Python. So, opening up Python, I have it open in terminal, so if I exit out and then just type Python, it brings me into Python 2.7.5. If you don't know how to install Python, look for one of my other videos because I show you actually how to install Python. It's pretty easy for Mac users, Windows users. It's easy too. There's just a few extra steps. And okay, so now that we have this, I'm going to import this library called urllib2. So urllib and urllib2 are not the same things. urllib2, I believe, is the most current version. So it's the most supported, and it has the least amount of bugs. So just kind of keep that in mind. And urllib2, it has a function in it that allows me to open up a URL. So when we go here, it's actually opening up a URL. So if we copy this domain and we do url lib2.url open, and then we put that URL in there, it's going to open that URL, right? problem that we see now is that we don't know what all this stuff is. Now, I already know what this is because it's in a dictionary, and what that dictionary, how I know it's in a dictionary is because of how it looks. So, when we look at this, we see that there's this little curly bracket, and we see those throughout this whole thing. There's curly brackets on the outside, and if you look again, on the website, there's curly brackets everywhere. So that means it's a dictionary, which also means that it's JSON, so JSON, like that, J-S-O-N. It's pronounced JSON, almost like Jason without an A, JSON. Okay, so that is JSON data, and in order for us to make it useful, we need to kind of change the way it looks. We need to load that JSON data, so we're going to import JSON, and then we're going to do JSON, let's actually print JSON.load, and then now I want to load this entire thing, so I'm going to copy that and paste it in here. Make sure you have the trailing parentheses, and we're going to press enter, and look at that. Now we can see all of that same data in our Python interpreter. So we can now use a lot of this data, but how are we going to use it? So let's actually make this a little bit better by writing the actual code down. So we have this API key, and then if I paste out that URL open that I just copied, I can paste that in here. I'm actually going to cut this and paste that above and say URL equals to, and then I'm going to have this long string for now. We'll make that a little bit more dynamic later, but let's just keep that as is now. Okay, so then I'm going to just say some arbitrary object is going to be opening this URL lib. We could also call it a JSON object, right? Because that's what we expect to be returned from this particular API. Most APIs, or a lot of APIs, will actually come out that way. It'll look just very similar to this. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're playing around with it. So now that we have the JSON data, we again have to import everything here. So import URL lib2 and also import JSON like we did in the Python interpreter. And then what we want to do is load this JSON object. So the data is going to be JSON.load and JSON object. Okay? So this thing, JSON object, is if we, let's change that to data. So if we print out data, right? So copying all this stuff and printing it back in here, it prints the same thing. So how do we work with this? Now, dictionaries are kind of cool because they are able to be called. In this case, we have like the two like kind of parent keys here. So the top parts are, we have meta and objects. And if we scroll down, we don't actually have anything else. Most of the stuff is actually inside of objects, right? So let's show you what I mean by that. So if I just print data and then objects, right? If that's what I'm printing, so let's go back into the terminal. Then if I scroll to the top, I'm not going to see meta anymore, right? Whereas if I go up one more of them, scroll to the top of that, you see meta. So I just called that one object. So if I go back in here, I see there's objects here, okay? And right off the bat, I see that there's this, these other brackets, these squared off brackets. In Python, that means that it's a list, right? So if things are like this, list 1, list 2, so on and so forth, that's a list, right? So we can iterate through that. This could also be a JSON dictionary, right, for each list item. And that's what we see. So if we scroll all the way back down, we see that there's list items in here. So there's actually stuff within that list. So let's actually iterate through the items. So for item in data.objects, let's just print item. And what this should do for us is show us each item, and now being kind of outside of the dictionary list, right? So each item is now its own separate line item, okay? So I can also just print item and say like, item is, and then we can add in the item, go through here, and you can concatenate those two things. So let's turn it into a string, and there. So now it's saying item is, and then the string, we turn the dictionary into a string so you can see it, and each one says item is. Okay, cool. So now each item, basically in this case, has its own dictionary, right? So if we look back in here, we see objects, and then there's list of objects, and if we look at the very first one, it shows us that bracket starts there, and then it closes there. So that's that full first item. Okay, so that is clear that it's a dictionary, and since it's all kind of clean for us, we can see that it's that first list item because this bracket is not closed, and we see a comma here, and then we can go down, and here's another one. Now, logically, too, you could look at this and say, okay, objects and then name, and then it says this, and if I scroll down a little bit, I see another one that says name, and it says something different. So they're probably not the same thing, and therefore they're probably in a list. Okay, cool. So what we can do then is item name. So now it's going to look through and use that dictionary, so it's going to look for that key, and then it's going to give us the value of that name. So this is the key, this is the value, and this is the key, this is the value. So you could do that over and over with each one of these keys, right? It's pretty straightforward as to how that stuff's going to work. So if we copy this, go back into terminal and paste it out, there it goes. It shows us Johnny's Real New York Pizza, Newport Beach. That's obvious, so we used the locality of Newport, so let's actually use phone instead. So we go back into Come Out of Edit, change this to phone, copy all this, paste it, there we go. So now we have the name and the phone of that particular place. Now, if you saw like how to do a CVS file or something like that, this part would be really easy. Now you can start pulling all this data and use it for your site. And of course, if you have Django or something like that too, you could use this data in your views. And it's just a simple little thing right here. So what I'm going to actually do is clean this up a little bit. I'm going to change how the URL is, and then I'm going to allow you guys to do your own search for a locality. So I'm going to turn it into a function. So I'm going to say locu search, right? And it's going to take in a query. And then we want our API. So our API key, basically, is going to be equal to the locu API. Okay? So once you have that, then you have your URL. It's definitely going to be this part, right? So that's going to be one part of it. But then we also need to make sure that we have our API key in here. And if we take a look, we're going to want to make sure that we have this question mark. So let's have that at the end. And then we notice locality equals that, and then it says and category equals that, and API key equals that. So if we do the first one being API underscore key equals 2, and then we add the API key, that will basically eliminate all these and just be like that, right? So that should kind of make sense. And then what we have left over is this little thing. So let's figure out the locality. So locality equals to, it's going to be something about the query, right? So we're going to have to kind of clean that up, but for now, let's leave it as that. So whatever you're searching in here, that's what the locality is going to be. And then we'll say, we can say final URL equals to URL plus, we're going to have to do and locality, right? So this and locality equals to, and then we add that locality there too. So now it's a little bit smarter. You could put this, like the locality search here, but one thing that I want to make sure that I do is I want to replace a space, so any spaces, with %20. So that represents a space. And I noticed how to do that because of this. Right, I searched Newport Beach, but there was a space already in that URL, because spaces in URLs just don't really play nice. So you want to make sure it's %20 if there's a space. In some cases, you could probably even use a dash. That might even work in this, but we're going to follow what they did, and that it was, they changed it to %20. Cool, so now that we have that, I'm also going to add and category of restaurant. So I'm going to do plus and then put that into quotes too. Now we have that final URL. I can take some of this stuff out and put it into our function here. And we want this still. So we're going to copy that and change this URL to final URL.